Imagine growing up in 1920s Brooklyn, where the aroma of bootleg whiskey rocked you to sleep and the whispers of gangsters formed the backdrop of your childhood. With a father who was a trafficker and siblings who had crime ingrained in their genetics, Joe Gallo was never going to be just a pawn in the Mafia's game. No, he sought to direct his own board, boldly moving his pieces to challenge the great bosses like Profaci and Colombo. Even in his downfall, he was a star. When the trigger was finally pulled, his death was a feast of bullets and conspiracy theories. Joseph Gallo, known by his nickname Crazy Joe, or simply Joe Gallo, was born on April 7th, 1929, in the Red Hook neighborhood of Brooklyn, New York. He was born into a context where the Italian-American Mafia was already thriving. Although the Mafia had emerged in the late 19th century, the Prohibition era, which began in 1919 and ended in 1933, provided an unprecedented opportunity for organized crime. The demand for illegal alcohol led to a boom in bootlegging and the Mafia's influence. The Italian-American Mafia eagerly jumped into this new source of income, establishing complex networks of smugglers, distributors, and enforcers. During this period, powerful figures like Al Capone and Lucky Luciano emerged as key leaders. These individuals amassed fortunes and laid the foundations of the modern mafia with their ingenuity and ruthlessness. Under Luciano's leadership, the mafia reorganized, weaving a deadly web of 5 families that ruled New York's illegal businesses with an iron fist. But their reach knew no bounds. From the frantic hustle of the docks to the luxurious salons of Chicago, their dark shadow spread like a plague. In this context, Crazy Joe was born. His father, Umberto, was no stranger to the world of crime, having been a bootlegger during Prohibition, the era when alcohol was illegal in the United States. The profits from his illicit activities allowed him to invest in loan sharking, and this criminal vocation was something his 3 sons embraced from a young age. Paternal warnings were no match for the stronger pull of criminal blood, which proved more effective than any advice. Joe grew up in the Kensington neighborhood, then considered part of Flatbush, where the Gallo family ran a small cafe called Jackie's Charolo, located at 108 Beverly Road. This establishment thrived on the pedestrian traffic from the nearby commercial district and subway station, attracting a diverse clientele that came and went along the bustling avenue. Joe's education began at the local primary school in Kensington. At 16, he continued his studies at the Brooklyn High School of Automotive Trades in Williamsburg. However, his fate was sealed long before he could imagine a life outside the world of crime. The influence of his environment, coupled with the lack of an alternative life model, led him to follow in his father's footsteps. Shortly after a car accident that left him with a brain injury and a nervous tic, our protagonist, along with his associates, embarked on a path deeply entrenched in the criminal underworld. Peter DePoulas and Frank Kiliano began planning various criminal schemes throughout their lives while frequenting the Ace Pool Room on Church Avenue and a candy store on 26th Street and 14th Avenue in the nearby neighborhood of Borough Park. In 1949, Joe Gallo watched the movie Kiss of Death, and Richard Widmark's portrayal of gangster Tommy Udo left such a profound impression on him that he began to imitate the character and recite his lines. This imitation not only reflected his fascination with gangster films, but also his desire to adopt a more fearsome identity in the underworld he was entering. In 1950, Joe's life took a significant turn when he was arrested and temporarily confined to the Kings County Hospital Center, where doctors diagnosed him with paranoid schizophrenia. Although stigmatized and misunderstood at the time, his mental disorder was a constant in his life, affecting both his personal decisions and his infamous activities. His brothers, Larry and Albert Gallo, were his closest criminal partners, and together they formed a feared trio on the streets. Their brotherly bond and natural inclination towards delinquency made them a formidable force in New York City. Beyond their family dynamics, the social environment in which they were raised, and the early crimes they committed together, the early lives of Joe's two brothers are not well documented. The oldest of the three was Larry, born around 1927, and the youngest was Albert, born in the mid-1930s, with Joe born between them. They also had a sister, Carmela, whose biography is also not well known. However, she was apparently not as involved in the family's criminal enterprises. Joe's personal life was as tumultuous as his criminal career. He was married twice. His first marriage was to Jeffy Lee Boyd, a Las Vegas showgirl. They married sometime in 1960 and had a daughter named Jo. However, their relationship was as volatile as Joe's life of crime, and the marriage ended in divorce nearly 7 years later, in the midst of the gang wars that plagued New York. The couple briefly reconciled, but the reunion did not last long. They reunited briefly in 1971, but it lasted only a few months before they divorced again. A year later, Gallo married a young actress named Sina Essery. This marriage was brief, lasting only a few months before he was killed in a scene reminiscent of a crime film. Joe began his criminal career as a thug and hitman for Joseph Profaci, the boss of the Profaci crime family. His entry into this underworld was facilitated by his family environment, where his father and brothers were already deeply involved in illegal activities. Joseph Profaci, known as the Olive Oil King, quickly made a name for himself in New York's organized crime scene after arriving in the United States in 1921. Through a combination of cunning, strategic alliances, and ruthless brutality, Profaci climbed the ranks to become the boss of his own crime family in 1928. The Profaci family would later become one of the 5 families of organized crime in New York City. Continuing with our protagonist Joe Gallo, he not only helped with his father's loan sharking business, but also played a crucial role in the vending machine operations run by his brother Larry. These ventures were seen as the crown jewels of the family's enterprises, generating substantial income and consolidating the Gallo family's power. Crazy Joe directly oversaw a variety of criminal enterprises, from rigged dice games to high-stakes card games. His headquarters was in the Dormitory, a brick tenement building at 51 President Street within the contemporary Columbia Street waterfront district. This location, which previously housed the Gallo family's vending machine interests, became the nerve center of their operations. In the basement of the building, Joe supposedly kept a pet lion named Cleo, symbolizing his power and, above all, his extravagance. As he consolidated his power and expanded his influence, Gallo continued to be a significant figure in New York's criminal underworld. Joe Gallo diversified his interests, secretly owning several nightclubs in Manhattan and 2 sweatshops in the garment district. These businesses not only increased his income, but also provided a facade of legitimacy and a way to launder money from his illicit activities. In 1957, Joseph Profaci assigned him and his gang a high-risk mission to assassinate Albert Anastasia, the feared boss of the Anastasia crime family, which would later become the notorious Gambino family. This operation was requested by Carlo Gambino, Anastasia's underboss, who aspired to replace his superior and needed Profaci's collaboration to execute his plan. On October 25th of that year, Albert Anastasia entered the barbershop at the Park Sheraton Hotel in Midtown Manhattan, unaware that he was about to meet his end. As he relaxed in the barber's chair, two men with scarves covering their faces burst into the establishment. Without saying a word, they pushed the barber aside and opened fire, killing Anastasia on the spot. The assassins of Anastasia were never officially identified, but years later, the future boss of the Profaci family, Carmine Persico, claimed that he and Crazy Joe were the shooters, joking that they had been part of Gallo's barbershop quintet. In 1958, the three criminal brothers were summoned to Washington, D.C. to testify before the McClellan Committee on Organized Crime in the U.S. Senate. This committee, led by Senator John L. McClellan and advised by Robert Francis Kennedy, was determined to dismantle Mafia operations. John McClellan, elected senator from Arkansas, was a formidable force in the fight against organized crime. During their visit to Kennedy's office, Joe Gallo displayed his audacity and charisma by flirting with Kennedy's secretary and remarking that the carpet in the office would be perfect for a dice game. Under the scrutiny of justice, the three brothers arrogantly stood their ground. On the witness stand, the Gallo brothers didn't flinch, maintaining their silence and defying the power of the law with the cold stoicism characteristic of true Mafia men. Joe's relationship with Joseph Profaci was not one of blind loyalty. He always had an eye on his own ascent and how he could increase his influence within the criminal family he led. His ambition and ruthless character led him to challenge Profaci's leadership, triggering a series of events that would shake the foundations of the crime family. This bold attitude was a key factor in the conflicts that led to the first internal strife within the Profaci family, which eventually sparked the First Colombo War. Frank Abbatemarco, a captain in the family, refused to pay the monthly tribute that Profaci demanded from all his soldiers. This act of defiance was not only difficult for Profaci to accept, but also a significant financial blow, as Abbatemarco controlled a lucrative numbers game operation. Profaci's insistence on receiving his tribute and Abbatemarco's refusal set the stage for a violent and bloody power struggle. Operating illegally in Red Hook, Brooklyn, this illicit business brought in an average income of $7,000 daily. The Gallo brothers began to align themselves with Abbatemarco, purportedly encouraged by family bosses Carlo Gambino and Tommy Lucchese, and also received support from Carmine Persico, by then a prominent member of the family. However, Abbatemarco was fatally shot in 1959 in what appeared to be a direct order from Joseph Profaci as retaliation for his defiance. A new escalation occurred on February 27, 1961, when Larry, Joe, and Albert made a daring decision to kidnap 4 of Joseph Profaci's top men. Among the hostages were underboss Joseph Magliocco, chief's brother Frank Profaci, Captain Salvatore Musia, and soldier John Simone. This direct act of defiance aimed to pressure Profaci into negotiating a more favorable financial arrangement for the 3 brothers. Larry and Albert sent Joe to California to keep him safe and coordinate from a distance. However, Joe Gallo, known for his brutality, had even bloodier plans. He wanted to kill one of the hostages and demand $100,000 as a condition to start negotiations. His idea faced strong opposition from his brother Larry, who preferred a less violent strategy. After weeks of intense negotiations, Profaci and his consigliere reached an agreement with the Gallos, securing the peaceful release of the hostages. But the peace was short-lived. In mid-year, in a spirit of revenge, Joseph Profaci ordered the murders of Larry and Joseph Joly, a key member of the gang. The killers, under Profaci's command, lured Joly into a trap with the promise of a fishing trip, only to brutally murder him. Larry also became a target, but survived a strangulation attempt orchestrated by Carmine Persico and Salvatore D'Ambrosio at the Sahara Club in East Flatbush. A police officer intervened just in time, saving Larry's life. This failed assassination attempt marked Carmine Persico's betrayal of the Gallos, who had previously allied with him against Profaci. Before the strangulation attempt, the gang began referring to Persico as the Snake for his betrayal. The gang war erupted with full ferocity, resulting in 9 murders and 3 disappearances. Larry, Joe, and Albert retreated to their headquarters while the battle raged on. During this conflict, Persico was charged with the attempted murder of Larry Gallo, but the charges were dismissed when Larry refused to testify, maintaining the Mafia's code of silence. In November of that year, Crazy Joe faced justice and was convicted of conspiracy and extortion. Shortly before Christmas, he was sentenced to serve between 7 and 14 years in prison. This sentence marked a crucial point in his life, temporarily removing him from the crime scene, but not stopping the legend he had begun to build. In 1962, while serving his prison sentence, Joe's brothers and 5 other gang members performed a heroic act that briefly garnered positive media attention. Larry and Albert entered a tenement building near their hideout that was on fire and rescued 6 children and their mother. The incident was widely covered by the media, momentarily softening the Gallos' criminal reputation and portraying them in a more human and heroic light. Despite this brief positive image, Joe continued to be involved in criminal activities during his time in prison. He befriended the African-American drug trafficker Leroy Nicky Barnes, who was serving time for low-level drug trafficking. Barnes also had interactions with Matthew Madonna, a heroin trafficker associated with the Lucchese family. Always strategic, Crazy Joe predicted Barnes's rise to power in the drug dens of Harlem, earning him the nickname Mr. Untouchable. Nicky Barnes began his criminal career in the early 1960s, focusing on building a heroin trafficking empire centered in Harlem. He controlled a significant portion of the heroin trade and formed an organization known as the Council, modeled after the Italian-American Mafia, to oversee drug distribution in Manhattan, the Bronx, and Brooklyn. The Council was notorious for its brutality and its ability to maintain control through violence and intimidation. Joe Gallo's friendship with Barnes grew so strong that Gallo took Barnes under his wing, teaching him how to enhance his criminal organization. This demonstrated Gallo's skill at manipulating and shaping his environment, even from behind bars. In August 1964, Joe filed a lawsuit against the Department of Corrections, claiming he had been subjected to unusual and cruel punishments at Green Haven after allowing a black barber to cut his hair. The prison commissioner characterized Gallo as a confrontational inmate and troublemaker, but this incident only served to strengthen his image as a man willing to challenge the system. During his time in prison, our protagonist showed another side of his personality as he took up watercolor painting and became an avid reader, delving into classic literature. He worked as an elevator operator in the prison workshops, and during a riot, he rescued a severely injured correctional officer from a group of furious inmates. This act earned him favorable testimony from the officer at a parole hearing, showcasing once again his ability to garner allies even in the most unexpected places. Donald Francos, a fellow inmate, described Gallo as a conversational and charismatic man with excellent verbal and oratory skills. From Francos's perspective, Gallo could describe the cutting of a man's throat with the same eloquence as he engaged in lively discussions about classical literature. This duality in his personality, between the ruthless gangster and the lover of culture, contributed to his myth and the fascination he exerted over those around him. In May 1968, while still in prison, Joe was deeply affected by the death of his brother Larry from cancer. This blow had a profound impact on him. Emotionally behind bars, Larry's death shifted the power dynamics within the gang. His passing created a leadership vacuum and increased pressure on Joe to maintain control and group cohesion. Joe Gallo was released from prison in 1971 after nearly a decade, with a renewed perspective and a relentless focus on his future in organized crime. However, an important part of this story remains unclear. What had happened with the Profaci family in the 1960s while Crazy Joe served his sentence. During this time, the Profaci family underwent significant changes. In 1962, Joseph Profaci passed away after over 30 years leading the family business, leaving a power vacuum. Joseph Colombo took control of the family and continued the battle against the rebellious Gallo brothers. In May 1963, a squad of Gallo gunmen repeatedly shot at Carmine Persico, who miraculously survived. However, by the end of the year, a peace agreement was reached through negotiations with family boss Raymond Patriarca, bringing a temporary halt to hostilities. In that same year, the Mafia Commission discovered that Magliocco had helped devise a plan to eliminate several commission leaders, leading to his forced resignation. Joseph Colombo, a member of the Profaci family and a betrayer of Magliocco, was installed as the new boss of the Profaci family, which then became the Colombo crime family by the Commission's designation. However, Colombo soon distanced himself from Gambino by establishing the Italian-American Civil Rights League, attracting significant media attention. At this time, Crazy Joe was on the brink of being released. His second wife, Sina, described him upon his release as a mere shell of the once strikingly handsome man he had been. Upon learning this, Colombo and Joseph Jacobelli invited him to a peace meeting, offering him $100,000. However, Gallo claimed not to be bound by the 1963 peace agreement and demanded $1 million to settle the dispute. Colombo rejected the proposal. On June 28, 1971, during a meeting at Columbus Circle in Manhattan, Colombo was shot 3 times by an African-American gunman named Jerome Johnson, who was immediately killed by Colombo's bodyguards. Colombo survived the shooting but was left physically impaired until his death in May 1978. While many in the Colombo family suspected Crazy Joe of orchestrating the shooting, the police concluded that Johnson acted alone. However, suspicion persisted within the family that Joe had ordered the assassination. Tensions between Joe and the Colombo family continued to escalate, with Joe steadfastly maintaining that he was not bound by the terms of the peace agreement reached 8 years earlier. This defiance led to fateful consequences. On April 7, 1972, around 4:30 in the morning, when Joe Gallo and his family entered a restaurant in Little Italy, Manhattan, to celebrate his 43rd birthday. He was accompanied by his sister Carmela, his wife Sina, their adopted daughter Lisa, his bodyguard Peter DiPietro, and DiPietro's girlfriend. Earlier that night, they had been at the Copacabana with Jerry Orbach. On April 7th, 1972, around 4:30 in the morning, Joe Gallo and his wife Martha entered a restaurant in Little Italy, Manhattan, to celebrate his 43rd birthday. They had invited actors Don Rickles and singer Peter Lamangelo to join them, but both were unavailable due to prior commitments. Meanwhile, Joseph Luparelli, an associate of the Colombo family, was at the bar, and upon seeing Joe Gallo, immediately contacted Joseph Iacovelli. Iacovelli instructed Luparelli to recruit additional men to eliminate Gallo. Luparelli then called Philip Gambino, Carmine DiBiase, and two purported members of the Patriarca family. Upon arriving at the restaurant, Luparelli stayed in the car while the other four men entered through the back door and opened fire with revolvers. Gallo was hit in the back, elbow, and buttock. Despite his injuries, he insulted and attempted to draw his own gun to protect his family. He tried to flee towards the main entrance, but collapsed on the street. Gallo was rushed to Bigman Downtown Hospital, where he was pronounced dead shortly after 5:30 a.m. However, there are conflicting accounts of the murder. Joe Coffey, a homicide detective with the New York Police Department, always believed that Crazy Joe's killer was a lone gunman. Additionally, author Charles Brand points out that Luparelli's statement was never corroborated. Brand speculates that it may have been misinformation ordered by the Colombo family to ease tensions after the shooting. Another version of the assassination comes from Frank Sheeran, a hitman and union leader who claimed to have been the sole shooter in the attack on Joe Gallo, acting under orders from Mafia figure Russell Bufalino. Jerry Capesi, a journalist and Mafia expert, suggested that if he had to choose, Sheeran would likely be the most probable culprit behind the murder. However, this version is disputed by others, like former Colombo family capo Michael Francisi and Vilton Elliott. Elliott argues in an article that Sheeran was not the killer. Regardless of which version is believed, Joe Gallo had been assassinated, and his funeral was closely monitored by the police. His sister Carmela passionately called for revenge beside his open casket, intensifying the already tense streets as Joey sought retaliation. Meanwhile, Albert Gallo dispatched a hitman from Las Vegas to the Neapolitan noodle restaurant in Manhattan, where Joseph Jacobelli, Alphonse Persico, and Genaro Langell were dining. However, the hitman mistook the mafiosos and shot 4 innocent bystanders, killing 2 of them. Following the botched attempt, Jacobelli fled to New York, leaving Carmine Persico, nicknamed the Snake, as the new boss of the Colombo family. The story of Joey Gallo, with its twists and turns, came to a violent end, leaving a lasting impact on the criminal underworld of New York. His life, marked by ambition, betrayal, and an unexpected love for literature, serves as a fascinating chapter in the history of organized crime. If you found this tale of Crazy Joe Gallo intriguing, we invite you to dive deeper into the world of infamous gangsters and their stories. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more gripping narratives from history's shadowy corners. Hit the like button if you enjoyed this video and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your support helps us continue bringing these captivating stories to life. Share this video with friends who appreciate a good gangster tale, and stay tuned for our next episode. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.